So, day 2 of the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin for killing George Floyd. Let's talk about the unique challenges in this case of jury selection. Because impaneling a fair and impartial jury, like justice, matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So today was the first day of jury selection in the Derek Chauvin case. Chauvin, of course, is the former Mineapolis police officer who was charged with killing George Floyd. And I believe they qualified 3 jurors, so it was kind of slow going. And the court will be in jury selection for several days and perhaps even a couple of weeks. Let me talk generally about jury selection, and then let's talk about what we saw today in the Chauvin case. First of all, when we select a jury, it is all art and no science. Jury selection is a challenging proposition, even for the most seasoned trial lawyers. I picked a lot of juries in my 30 years as a federal prosecutor, and I was always second-guessing myself about whether I kept the right folks on the jury, whether I struck the right folks from the jury. Because as I say, it's an art, not a science. You try to read people. You hope that the jurors are being completely honest and candid when they're answering the questions that you ask. And we ask the jurors lots of questions. It's called voir dire, which loosely translated just means to speak the truth. So let me talk about the prevailing wisdom when it comes to jury selection, and then let me talk about how that prevailing wisdom kind of gets turned on its head when the defendant is a police officer. So, first, the prevailing wisdom. If a potential juror is answering questions during jury selection and they say things that make it clear that they're really skeptical of the police, maybe they say, look, I've had a lot of bad experiences with the police. I got pulled over for no reason. I was treated disrespectfully. Maybe they once arrested a family member of mine and that person didn't do anything wrong. I don't like the police and I'm not inclined to trust the police. That kind of a juror often seems to be somebody that the prosecutor might not want on the jury. Why? Because prosecutors put a lot of police officers and agents and detectives and investigators on the stand in the typical criminal trial, and you want the jurors to give the police officer's testimony sort of a fair shake. And if somebody sounds like they've had really bad experiences with the police, maybe they're biased against the police as a result of their life experiences, generally prosecutors say, not my kind of juror. A defendant might want a juror who's really skeptical of the police, thinking that that juror might be disinclined to believe the testimony of the police officers when they're saying things that implicate the defendant. Conversely, if you have potential jurors who say, I love the police, I support the police, I back the police, they can do no wrong in my book. Prosecutors generally might say, okay, that's an acceptable juror because they're pro-law enforcement and they're more inclined to believe the testimony of the police officers when they're testifying about things that incriminate the defense, right, the defendant. But the defense attorney and the defendant might not want somebody who is pro-police, right? That's the prevailing wisdom. I'm oversimplifying it, yes, but that's the prevailing wisdom in criminal trials. However, in this case, the defendant, the person charged with the homicide, is a police officer. So the prevailing wisdom sort of gets turned on its head. Because now if there's a juror who seems to be, less than enamored of the police, I don't like the police, I've had bad experiences with the police, I've been pulled over for no reason, I've been wrongly accused, my family member was mistreated by police officers. Well, Ordinarily, the prosecution wouldn't be wild about that kind of juror, but maybe in this case, when the defendant, the person on trial, is a police officer, then maybe the prosecutor doesn't mind so much having a juror who has negative feelings toward the police, right? But maybe the defendant, the police officer, together with his defense attorney, don't want that kind of person. They want somebody who is gung-ho pro-police all the way. So, the prevailing wisdom kind of gets turned on its head regarding who is a good juror for one side or the other when the defendant himself is a former police officer. Let me use one concrete example that we heard today during jury selection in the Chauvin case. It was the juror that was designated juror number 8. Of course, this is an anonymous jury. We don't know their names, we can't see their faces, we don't have really much biographical information about them. And it's an anonymous jury because the system is trying to protect the identity of the jurors so they don't, suffer any harassment or consequences as a result of being part of the jury and maybe voting one way or the other. Anonymous juries are not unprecedented, but they're really unusual. I think in my 30 years, I only had 2, and they were in major RICO trials against what was the most violent criminal gang in the history of Washington, D.C., and we had anonymous juries in those cases, so we didn't know their names, we didn't have much information about them. They were bussed in from an undisclosed location by the U.S. Marshals every morning and bussed back out by the Marshals every evening. So it was an unusual case, but anonymous juries are not unprecedented, particularly in really high-profile, emotionally charged cases. So they referred to this juror as juror number 8. Let me use juror number 8 as an example to try to demonstrate what a mixed bag jurors can present in this kind of a case. Juror number 8 said, among other things, that I have really good feelings about police officers. In fact, he said, I am pro Blue Lives Matter. I'm a big police supporter. He then said, but I have pretty strong negative feelings about the Black Lives Matter movement, the BLM movement. I have negative feelings toward the BLM movement, but positive feelings toward the Blue Lives Matter movement. So what might that suggest? Maybe this juror would be good and supportive of Derek Chauvin. Maybe this is a juror that the defense would want and the prosecution wouldn't want. But then you know what juror number 8 added? He said, and by the way, I have seen the videotape, and it looked like excessive force to me. So he's a strong police supporter, but apparently what he saw on that tape was not good police work. To him, it looked like excessive force. So what do you do with a juror like that? These are challenging tactical questions that both the defense and the prosecution have to sort through when they're trying to pick the best jury. I mean, jurors that are open to their side of the case, jurors that can sit fairly and impartially and can agree that even though they've seen publicity, even though they've seen the video, who hasn't, of what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd, they can set all that aside and make their decision, render their verdict based only on what they hear in the courtroom presented during the trial. So these are challenging issues for the parties to sort through, and I continue to believe and wonder about whether at some point during jury selection, Derek Chauvin and his lawyers say, you know what, we've tried to go through the jurors and find jurors we think can give us a fair shake and approach this case with an open mind. But given the saturation and given the emotion, the saturation of the media attention and the emotion of the incident itself, we're prepared to waive our right to a jury trial and let the judge sit as the jury, a bench trial, a judge trial. Let the judge be the finder of fact, deciding whether Chauvin is guilty or not guilty. That could still happen because under the laws in Minnesota, you can waive your right to a jury trial and have a judge try your case. I'm not sure of the procedural niceties and if there's a time limit on that if you've already been involved in jury selection. I suspect they're not, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So I would say let's keep an eye out for the possibility, maybe not the likelihood, but the possibility that Derek Chauvin and his lawyer end up at some point deciding to waive their right to a jury trial. And if you have a case where the emotion cuts against you as a defendant, but maybe you have a technical legal defense that might resonate with a judge, because a judge is likely to be more cool-headed and not get swept up in the emotion of the incident or the case, then it could be an appropriate tactical decision to waive your right to a jury trial. We'll have to stay tuned. And I'll try to be bringing you updates every day as things of interest unfold during the course of the trial. But I will always end these videos by saying, as we kind of walk this road together through the Derek Chauvin case, we will continue to remain focused on the hope that George Floyd and his family will receive justice for what was done to him, because justice matters. As always, folks, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.